April 19th, 1868. Utsunomiya Castle was in turmoil. Our forces numbered around 2,000, while the castle had barely 700 guardsmen. The battle for Shimogawara Gate was especially intense, with 1,000 shogunate troops against only 400 guards. Although the shogunate soldiers easily outnumbered their opponents, the guards were able to use the fortifications to great effect, fighting the invaders to a standstill. Guns cracked and bullets flew across the battlefield as men screamed in pain. Hijikata-san turned to face the 200 men now under his direct command.
このままじゃキリがねえな。そろそろ敵陣に突っ込んでもいい頃か。
敵陣に？何を言ってるんですか。向こうは銃を持ってるんですよ。
奴らが持ってるのは薩長が使ってる新型の銃とは違う。少し離れるよ。当たらねえし命中精度も低い。
Damn.
それに弾の1発や2発当たったところですぐ死ぬわけじゃねえさ。
そんな無茶な。
The men were stunned. Never would they have imagined that they might be given orders like these. Hijikata-san, on the other hand, stared back at them coldly.
お前ら、ここに何しに来た？戦しに来たんだろ。だったら死ぬ覚悟ぐらい持ち合わせてるはずじゃねえか。合図をしたらそこのやつから前に進め。
He pointed toward the source of the bullets raining upon the battlefield. Hijikata-san's men turned pale, and many of them trembled. Eventually, one of them snapped.
俺は嫌だ。こんなところで死にたくねえ。
He broke and turned to run. No sooner than when the soldier ran for it, Hijikata-san's sword left from its scabbard and sliced across the back of the fleeing man. He fell to the ground, dead. The men watching swallowed. For a few short moments, they were utterly silent. The commotion broke out shortly afterwards.
おい、味方を切りやがったぜ。どういうことだ。頭がいかれてやがるのか。
Hijikata let his cold eyes slide slowly across their ranks, and slowly the mumbling ceased.
他にも敵前逃亡して奴はいるか？怖かったら逃げてもいいんだ。ただし、逃げようとした奴は片っ端からこの刀で切り捨ててる。俺に切り殺されるか、それとも銃弾の雨の中を突っ切っていくか、好きな方を選べ。
His eyes were cold and dead. He was serious. Not a man there believed for a moment that he wouldn't kill them without a second thought.
あの人は鬼だよ。
With one final scowl, Hijikata-san turned back to the battlefield and took off across it. He ran through the hail of bullets and fell upon the men defending the gate like a vengeful god. His beloved sword, the Izumi no Kami Kanasera, dripped with flesh blood. But he swung it again and again, oblivious and uncaring. I desperately hid in the shadows, making sure the bullets didn't hit me as I waited for Hijikata-san.
副長、あと少しで城門を崩せそうです。
I don't think I've ever seen Shimano with his sword out. Shimada's face was smeared with dirt and blood as he ran up towards the commander.
おう、頼りにしてるぜ、島田。
The guards fired desperately, but as Hijikata-san had said, their guns were old and inaccurate. Attacking men with guns head-on was frightening, but Hijikata-san seemed to be utterly unconcerned. He dodged and wove through them, his sword ending lives with each stroke. Considering that the battle was taking place during the middle of the day, he shouldn't even be standing. However, his determination and savagery gave no such indications of distress.
すげえ。あの人は本当に人間なのか。地獄から這い上がってきた鬼なんじゃねえのか。
The mood among the men watching Hijikata-san fight began to change. None of them had likely ever seen a man fight so fearlessly in the face of gunfire, or even at all. As I yawned. His eyes glowed out from his blood-drenched face, and his arms never slowed.
おいお前たち、そろそろ敵兵の弾もつき始めたようだぜ。気合い入れ直せよ。
He took a moment to roar over his shoulder before turning back to the important task of killing guards. His fearless charge seemed to have had an effect.
この戦、もしかしたら勝てるんじゃねえか。そうだ、勝てるかもしれねえぞ。新選組に土方さんに続け。
As their morale rose, so did their determination, and the fighting along the gate grew more intense. Then, just after the sun had passed its zenith,
開いた。城の大門が開いたぞ。俺たちが勝ったのか。
the news spread along the line like wildfire.
思ったより手間取ったが、ま、予想通りだ。
副長の采配、お見事でしたよ。弾の嵐の中を突っ切っていく姿はまさに武士の鏡でした。
おだてたって何も出ねえよ。
Say,
それにまだ城が落ちたわけじゃねえ。気を引き締めてかからねえと。
oh. I paused as well. I paused as we all talked because... Huh? The soldiers who'd been so reluctant to fight had now surrounded us, murmuring excitedly to one another.
土方さん、素晴らしい戦いぶりでした。まさに源義経が蘇ったかのようで、さすが新選組の副長です。
Yoshitsune Minamoto, a general from the late Heian period, he is best known for defeating the Taira clan at the Battle of Ichinotani and Yashima, then destroying them at the Battle of Danora. Oh god, more words I can't speak correctly. Danora. During the Genpei War.
我々はあなた方を誤解していました。申し訳ございません。離脱しようとしていた兵士を切ったのは我々を勝利に導くため、これ以上の脱退者を出さないためだったのですね。
あなたの元で戦えることを誇りに思います。あなた方こそ本物の武士だ。
The curiosity and fear we'd seen on their faces when we first met was gone now, replaced with respect and adulation.
これは一体どういうことなんでしょう。
I'm confused as well, Shimada. Shimada also seemed to be in shock of the reception and didn't know what to make of it. Even Hijikata is put off. Now that the battle was over, Hijikata-san was looking a little ill, and its mood was souring with its health. Are you alright? He'd pushed himself so hard and during daylight hours that his body had likely reached its limit. Besides, he was almost bathing in all that blood. The bloodlust might start up at any moment. It seemed that only sheer force would keep him standing.
大丈夫に決まってんだろ。城を落とすまでは死ねねえさ。
He rubbed a fist across his face. wiping away sweat and blood at the same time, then turned back to the soldiers.
先方軍は俺に続け。日暮れ前には城に攻め入るぞ。
はい。
Dawn came and Hijikata-san led the advance guard in an attack on Utsunomiya castle itself. Their previous cowardice now forgotten, his troops fell upon the castle's defenders with great vigor.
この調子だと大した苦労もなしに落とせちまいそうだ。
He looked at me with a slight grin just as Shimada appeared.
副長、伝令です。大広間の部隊が苦戦しているとのこと。
苦戦だと。
Why do I have a bad feeling about this one?
詳しいことは分かりませんが、俺が様子を見に行ってきましょうか。
いや、俺が行ってくる。ここは頼んだぞ。
はい、分かり。
Hijikata-san, what should I do?
ついてこい。一人で戦場をうろちょろされて、流れ弾にでも当たられちゃ夢見も悪い。
Hi. So it's decided that I head to the banquet hall with Hijikata-san. Bad feeling! Very bad feeling. Even before we stepped into the banquet hall, I knew something was wrong. Inside, our men were dead on the floor, their bodies laid out like the spokes of a wheel. And at the hub of that wheel...
やれやれ、こんなところにまで来てやがったのか。薩長と幕府が戦をやってるってのに、優雅にご旅行か。鬼ってのはよっぽど暇らしいな。
Yep. The only two men still standing in the banquet hall weren't strangers. Also, where the fuck is Shiranui? They were Kazuma and Amagiri, the demons. Why are you here?
我々は薩摩藩の命で密書を届けに参りました。まさか戦に巻き込まれるとは思いませんでしたがね。しかもその後に君たちも居合わせていたとは。
つまり新政府の連中の使いっ走りをさせられてるってこと。鬼ってのは誇り高いんだな。
まさかこんなに早くお前と相まみえることができるとは思わなかったぞ。土方とやら。
顔に向こう傷つけてもらったのがよっぽど嬉しかったのか。そこまで喜んでもらえりゃ光栄だぜ。
お酒。
Kazuma ground his teeth and drew the long sword slung at his hip. Tachi, a long sword wielded by samurai between the 10th and 16th centuries. Its curvature and length set it apart in utility to the katana, which it precedes by hundreds of years. It wasn't the sword he'd worn the last time we'd met. This one shone in a strange, distinguishing way? It was almost as if it simply generated its own light rather than reflecting what hid it. I found myself unable to look away.
お前を殺せばあの時の屈辱を晴らすことができる。天霧、お前は手を出す。この男は俺の獲物だ。お好きになさるがいい。
Amagiri sighed and gave a minuscule shrug. He padded to a corner and folded his arms in silence.
やれやれ。腕の一本でも切り落とされなきゃわかんねえみてえだな。
He leaped across the room at Kazuma like a bullet from a gun. Kazuma blocked Hijikata's strike calmly, and their blades rattled against one another. Then Kazuma pushed back, and Hijikata was thrown across the room. In the blink of an eye, he leapt after his opponent and whipped out his sword in a quick slash. I don't like where this is going, and I'm afraid. Hijikata-san brought up the Kanasada at the last moment, catching Kazuma's strike before it could hit him.
この間に比べ動きに精細がない。人間相手の戦で疲れたか。まがいものとはいえ鬼のお前。
Hijikata-san's sword began to shake. Kazuma's edged closer. He was right though. Even with fury-enhanced speed and strength, Hijikata-san was slower than before, less focused.
なるほど。まだ日没までには間があるからな。まがいものが動き回るには辛い時間だ。
A cruel, arrogant grin spread across his face, filled with altogether too many teeth.
だがお前に合わせて手を抜くような真似はせんぞ。どんな相手にでも全力を尽くす。それが武士の作法とやらなのだ。くそったれ
Hijikata-san leaped backwards, but he wasn't fast enough. Kazuma's sword flicked out. The glowing blade traced a brilliant red line across his chest, blood erupting and splattering to the floor. Hijikata dropped to his knees. The front of his shirt began to turn red, and drops of blood fell to the floor beneath him. But he'd be okay. He was a fury. Any moment now, the bleeding would stop. But it didn't. A agonizing second stretched on, and still blood flowed from Hijikata-san's chest. Oh! You know, I was curious to know what effects that sword would have on a fury, but now I know!
傷がいつまでも癒えぬのが下船か。まがいものの鬼よ。この刀は同時切りや質など。かの源頼光が主天童子という鬼を退治した時に使ったとされている。
Yorimitsu Minamoto, a Chinese general who had lived during the Heian period. He is the hero of several folk tales, such as the defeat of the demon Shuten Doji at Oyama and the destruction of the Tsuchigumo. Shuten Doji, a demon who had lived during the Heian period, whose nefarious exploits enlisted fear to all who encountered him. He resided in Mount Oe in Kyoto.
我が風間家に代々伝わる品だが、本当に鬼を切ることができるのかを確かめた者はおらんでな。
Seriously?
ちょうどいい機会と持ってきたまでだ。少なくともまがいものの鬼を退治することはできる。
Kazuma smirked, giving the impression that he figured his victory was a foregone conclusion. He looked down at Hijikata-san, who was on his knees.
まがいものの鬼相手に随分大層なものを持ち出してくるじゃねえか。よっぽど必死なんだ。
He gave a taunting laugh, but Kazuma's grin didn't even twitch.
俺に生涯最大の屈辱を与えた貴様を地獄へと送ることができるのはどんな手でもつか。
I'm sorry, Kazuma, I can't hear a fucking word you said.
この刀で負わせた傷は塞がらんぞ。俺に勝つためなせつ あの時の貴様の行動が今すべて無に帰したというわけ。
Hijikata-san prodded experimentally at the wound on his chest, then climbed slowly to his feet. Why are you doing that, sir?
要するに切られなきゃいいだけだ。羅刹になるのはそうしてた。
どこまでも減らず口を立てる。いいだろう。その強がりがいつまで続くか確かめてやる。
The demon's air blade flickered with blue-white light and almost seemed to shiver in concert with Kazuma's murderous intent. Suddenly, the air seemed thick and oppressive. It was an effort just to breathe, and when I looked at Kazuma, my skin began to crawl. The Demon Slayer dropped towards Hijikata-san. He dodged the Demon Slayer, albeit only barely, and brought his own sword up to strike back. But when the Kanasada arrived, Kazuma had simply disappeared. No, I realized he hadn't disappeared. He was simply moving too fast for the eyes to see. Hijikata seemed to be able to keep up, but the margin for error was slim and getting slimmer. Kazuma dodged Hijikata-san's attack with ease, and his riposte slammed into the other man's shoulder. Hijikata-san's shirt was torn away to display a fresh, ragged wound.
どうすれば俺を殺せるか必死に考えている表情。俺が見たいのはその顔で。どうやっても俺を殺せない。そのことを悟った時の絶望の表情を見せろ。
Blood poured from his wounds, but Hijikata-san brought up his sword in time to catch the Demon Slayer. But he'd lost too much blood and his body was beginning to weaken. Kazuma overpowered him and Hijikata was thrown back. Then, as if things hadn't gotten bad enough...
NANI?!
The white had disappeared from Hijikata-san's hair.
そろそろ限界が近づいてきたか。羅刹から人間の姿に戻っているぞ。虫けら以下の脆弱で哀れな生き物にな。
Kazuma's maniacal laugh echoed throughout the room as he gloated over the nearly unconscious Hijikata-san.
さあ泣けわめけ未練がましく命乞いをしてみせろ。今日にいた頃から我らの邪魔をし続けた忌々しい新選組の名もろとも貴様を葬り去ってやる。
Hijikata-san's head twitched.
新選組を売り去るだと。
He lost so much blood. I was amazed he was conscious, let alone lucid. But as I watched, his hands dug into the floor mat like claws. It looked almost like he was keeping himself up through sheer will.
さんと会えなくなっちまってから俺一人で抱えるにゃ重くて重くて仕方なかった荷物だけどよ。それでもてめえの時に葬られちまうと思うと虫唾が走るぜ。
Blood poured from his shoulder and his chest, but he struggled to stand. The sight of him was so powerful, it was so tragic, that I couldn't bear to watch. If he didn't stop, he would die. I had to do something. Stop, Hijikata-san. Hijikata-san, no! You're hurt badly if you use your fairy powers. The His eyes flickered to me for a moment, and I could see that his mind was already made up. Then they were gone, and he glared at Kazuma.
てめえの命がどれだけ削られようとどうでもいいさ。ただここでこいつに殺されてやるわけにはいかねえ。今まで命かけて作り上げてきたのにこんな刀ごときにぶち壊されてたまるかよ。
その体で一体何ができるというのか。見苦しさここに極まれる。
Kazuma swung his sword again, almost lazily. Hijikata tried to lift up his kanasada in time to block, but his right hand refused to respond. Then Kazuma's sword slammed through his right shoulder. He let out a strangled scream as his arm twitched in pain, his sword trembling from his grasp. Hijikata-san's clothes were soaked in blood, and his skin was the color of paper. Only rage and pure willpower kept him upright. But even then, they were beginning to waver.
もう少し楽しませてもらえると思う。そろそろ別れの時のようだ。もう憎まれ口を叩く体力も残っていないか。
Hijikata-san's shoulders shuddered with each labored breath, but still he glared at Kazuma.
どうした？刀を取らんのか。武士の意地とやらはどこに行ったのだ。
Even though Hijikata-san struggled to draw breath, he mustered what little strength he had left in him and reached for his beloved sword. It surprised me that Hijikata-san could even stand, and he gritted his teeth angrily before facing Kazuma. The tip of the blade tipped and wavered, and blood poured from his wounds, but still he stood. Please, I begged, just stop. Don't die. Just looking at him was enough to make me want to scream. Kazuma lifted that cruel sword, slick with Hijikata-san's blood, and he smiled.
待ちわびたぞこの時を。俺に屈辱を与えた貴様をこの手で殺すことができる時をな。
Suddenly, an ear-splitting detonation tore through the building. The wood of the castle creaked and moaned. I could smell something burning.
この匂い。もしや。
Suddenly distracted, Kazuma flicked his gaze around the room, looking for the source of the interruption.
カズだ！あいつら退却するとき城に火を放ちやがったぞ。火に巻かれちゃかなわねえ。さっさと逃げようぜ。
The fire spread quickly, and in mere moments, the roar of it was deafening. Flames began to lick at the wall of the banquet hall. Black smoke poured into the room, rough and irritating at my throat. The flames leapt to the dry wood and paper of the door, then to the flammable mats covering the floor. Almost immediately, the room was plunged into nigh unbearable heat, but neither Hijikata-san nor Kazuma lowered their swords. Both men were waiting for a chance to strike. If either made even the smallest wrong move, he would be cut to ribbons by the other. Tension filled the air until it was as thick as the acrid smoke. With a crackling roar and the moan of tortured wood, a section of ceiling collapsed to the floor between them.
くそ、崩れ始めたか。これ以上ここにいると我が身も危うい。
He shoved the Demon Slayer back into its scabbard angrily, glaring across the flaming wreckage at Hijikata-san.
土方とやら、 この場は預けて勝負はまたの機会としよう。次こそは貴様の息の根を止めてやるから、せいぜい楽しんでおくがいい。
With one last grotesque, inhuman-like smile, Kazuma disappeared. Hijikata, are you alright? I ran to him. His face was twisted in pain, and he collapsed to his knees on the floor. His skin looked like wax. Practically forgotten until now, Amagiri walked towards us from his corner, seemingly unconcerned with the flames around him.
今後、我々鬼の一族は倒幕勢力から手を引くつもりです。
そりゃどうしてだ。
我々は薩摩藩から受けた恩をもう十分返したと思っています。何よりそう遠くないうちに幕府は滅びます。我々が手を貸さずとも。
I saw a glimpse of a bitter smile coming out of Hijikata-san's lips.
ああ、そりゃ承知の上だ。
それでも沈みゆく船にこのまま乗り続けるつもりですか。君たちの作り上げたものを評価せず、最悪の形で裏切り、放り捨てたのが徳川幕府だというのに。
The truth of Amagiri's words drove a knife into Hijikata-san's heart, and I saw his face fall. He replied with a sad smile.
それでも武士ってのは殿様のために戦うもんだろう。俺が守りてえのは今江戸で蟄居してる慶喜さんでも江戸城でも幕府のお偉いさんでもねえ。俺たちの心の中にある幕府を、将軍を守るために生まれた新選組を守り抜きてんだ。
Water time.
てしょうがねえ荷物だが、近藤さんが戻ってくる前になくしちまうわけにはいかねえのさ。
Amagiri had closed his eyes while Hijikata-san spoke. Now he stood silent for a moment. After a long moment, he reopened his eyes.
もし風間が今後、君は彼女に関わり続けるのであれば、彼は鬼としての仁義を失うことになる。一族の後ろ盾をなくし、はぐれ鬼となります。おそらくそう遠くない未来、君たちの前に姿を現すと思いますが、それは我々には関わりのないこと。彼のことは君たちに任せます。
Then Amagiri turned and disappeared. At last, Hijikata-san collapsed. Although from relief or simple exhaustion, I couldn't tell. Hijikata-san, are you okay? But he had passed out. No matter how much I shook him or cried his name, he refused to open his eyes. The fire had grown more intense, and I was beginning to sweat in earnest. If we didn't get out soon, we would both burn to death. But how could I move Hijikata-san? It was far too heavy for me to carry on my own.
副長、雪村君、どちらにいますか?
Shimada! From down the hall came Shimada's voice. Shimada! We're over here! Hijikata-san is... Moments later, Shimada burst through the door, scattering sparks and burning fragments across the room. Damn!
副長しっかりしてください
He just passed out a minute ago. He's lost a lot of blood. If he doesn't get treated soon, he'll...
わかりました俺が運んできます君は俺の後ろをついてきてください煙を絶対に吸わないようにして
Without even waiting for my reply, Shimada hefted Hijikata-san onto his back and set off on a jog. Hey!